Digital noise drowns millions, seeking truth. Ancient wisdom guides life, not fleeting trends. They were recorded thousands of years ago in the pages of the Holy Bible. Welcome to Scroll to Soul. We don't just read the text, we decode the real-world execution strategy for the modern era. If you are ready to stop being a passive observer and start building a life rooted in deep wisdom and intentional action, you are in the right place. You are now among the practitioners. Let's unlock today's blueprint. In the realm of global high finance and strategic leadership, the ultimate competitive advantage is predictive analytics. It is the unique ability to look past the immediate horizon, filter out the noise of current success, and anticipate the exact moment an expansion shifts into a systemic contraction. Modern institutions spend hundreds of millions of dollars on complex algorithmic models, attempting to map out the volatile waves of the business cycle. Yet, the most flawless macroeconomic forecasting and crisis mitigation strategy in recorded history occurred long before the invention of modern computing. It was executed in ancient Egypt under the leadership of a young Hebrew administrator named Joseph. To truly master this strategy, you must first clear away the simplified versions often taught in casual settings. This was not merely a story about dreams and family dynamics. It was a masterclass in sovereign resource management, structural asset preservation, and aggressive risk mitigation. The strategy is detailed in Genesis chapter 41, and it remains the gold standard blueprint for any practitioner seeking to safeguard capital and influence across volatile cycles. Pharaoh, the absolute ruler of the dominant superpower of the age, experienced two recurring dreams that the finest minds in his administration could not decipher. When Joseph was summoned from the prison depths, he didn't just provide a symbolic interpretation. He delivered a comprehensive macroeconomic policy memorandum that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the nation. Joseph analyzed the data and laid out the facts. Egypt was on the precipice of a dramatic 14-year cycle. The first 7 years would bring unprecedented compounding abundance, a hyper-expansionary bull market where every investment would yield massive returns. The following 7 years would bring a total, catastrophic collapse, a prolonged bear market characterized by deep scarcity and structural failure. Let us look at the baseline realities of the Joseph strategy. Most individuals, businesses, and organizations make their greatest, most devastating errors during periods of highest abundance, when capital flows freely, when opportunities break records, and when progress feels effortless. The natural human bias is to assume the expansion will run indefinitely. We experience lifestyle creep. We over-leverage our active operations, and we burn through our liquid reserves because we confuse temporary market tailwinds with personal permanence. But Joseph understood an unalterable strategic truth. Every major expansion carries the seeds of an inevitable, balancing contraction. To survive the winter, you must intentionally discipline yourself during the summer. If you do not build a systemic wall between your current harvest and your current consumption, the incoming contraction will completely wipe out your legacy. Predictive insight is useless without immediate systemic execution. Pay close attention to the specific operational recommendation Joseph made to Pharaoh in Genesis chapter 41, verse 34. He stated, "Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years." 1/5. That is exactly 20%. Joseph did not suggest a minor, comfortable 5% or 10% savings rate. He mandated a systematic, non-negotiable 20% capital levy on the gross economic output of the entire nation during its highest earning years. In modern wealth and resource planning, we often talk about building a basic emergency fund that covers 3 to 6 months of expenses. While that is fine for baseline personal survival, it is completely inadequate for surviving a prolonged, structural downturn or capitalizing on historic market opportunities. Joseph established a massive reserve fund using physical commodities, specifically grain. He realized that during a hyper-expansionary period, the market price of grain would drop significantly due to massive oversupply. By aggressively accumulating this depreciated asset when it was cheap and abundant, he was building an enormous position in a critical resource that would become exponentially valuable when the macro environment turned. For the modern practitioner, this 20% rule is a foundational mandate that must be institutionalized long before the crisis arrives. When your career is accelerating, when your business is scaling rapidly, or when your operational revenue is hitting fresh all-time highs, that is not your cue to upgrade your lifestyle, buy premium depreciating luxuries, or inflate your operational overhead. That is your exact signal to institutionalize your 20% reserve strategy. You must systematically strip away 1/5 of your gross earnings and move them completely out of your active operational accounts. This capital must be placed into highly secure, liquid, and strategic reserve assets. It is your war chest, designed specifically to withstand the inevitable arrival of lean years and give you absolute leverage when the rest of the world is forced to play defense. The 20% reserve strategy is only effective if your infrastructure can preserve the accumulated assets from external decay and internal temptation. Genesis chapter 41, verse 35, records Joseph's directive. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the theft cities. And let them keep it. Notice two vital operational components here: centralized authority and localized city storage. Joseph did not leave the 20% accumulation up to the individual discretion of the citizens. He knew that if left to their own devices, individuals would consume, mismanage, or sell their excess resources for immediate gratification. He institutionalized the storage process under a centralized, highly disciplined system. Furthermore, he decentralized the storage locations by building massive granaries directly within the individual major cities, ensuring the reserves were positioned close to the localized points of need and protected from logistics failures. In the modern landscape of life and business, infrastructure is everything. If you store your capital and emotional reserves in highly volatile, speculative, or easily accessible vehicles, you haven't built a granary. You've built a leaking barn. Your reserves must be protected from systemic decay, unexpected inflation liabilities, and the constant friction of impulse spending. This requires the setup of dedicated accounts, separate corporate entities, high-yield reserve accounts, or low-risk structural instruments that are entirely insulated from your day-to-day checking and active accounts. The goal is to make your reserves highly secure and mathematically untouchable during the boom years, yet strategically accessible when the macro environment shifts from expansion to contraction. You must build your storage facilities before the first drop of economic rain stops falling. Now let us look at the ultimate high-yield outcome of the Joseph strategy when executed with absolute precision. When the 7 years of severe famine finally arrived, the entire global region was caught completely unprepared. Genesis chapter 41 verse 55 tells us that when the land of Egypt famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Joseph opened all the storehouses. But Joseph did not run a charity. He ran a highly disciplined, strategic recovery operation. As the famine intensified over the next 7 years, the surrounding population completely exhausted their liquid currency. Genesis chapter 47 records the ultimate outcome of this macro cycle. Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt for the grain they bought. When their money was exhausted, they brought their livestock. When their livestock was gone, they sold their land equity directly to the crown in exchange for basic sustenance. By the time the macroeconomic cycle completed its 14-year run, the administration had systematically consolidated the ownership of virtually all the currency, livestock, and real estate assets in Egypt. This was an unprecedented consolidation of national wealth and systemic influence, achieved entirely because one leader had the vision to store capital reserves when assets were cheap and out of favor. This is the ultimate lesson for the practitioners. When an economic winter or a structural crisis hits an industry, those who are over-leveraged, under-reserved, and exposed are forced to liquidate their high-value assets at deep, catastrophic discounts just to survive. They sell their corporate shares at the absolute bottom, liquidate their prime real estate portfolios, and surrender their hard-earned business equity to whoever holds liquid reserves. Conversely, the practitioner who has consistently executed the Joseph strategy steps into a down market not as a victim, but as the ultimate provider of stability and liquidity. You do not panic during a recession. You deploy your reserves. You buy premium income-producing assets and secure long-term positioning when they are heavily discounted by the market. A downturn is not a tragedy for a prepared practitioner. It is a historic, generational wealth and influence transfer event. Knowledge without application is just intellectual entertainment. A life of true impact is built entirely through execution. And that brings us to today's practitioner challenge. Look at your own path, your decisions, and your interactions this week. Identify the single biggest area where passive habits are holding you back, and actively apply the exact scriptural framework we unpacked today. Drop a comment below with the word applied once you've put it into action. Let the community know you are executing, not just listening. We are the practitioners. Unlock life's blueprint. Subscribe, ring the bell, share. In our next video, we are diving into another foundational principle. Until then, keep executing.